The morning sun cast long shadows across Arlington National Cemetery, where rows of white headstones stood in perfect formation, silent sentinels honoring lives given in service to country. A heavy mist clung to the manicured grass, reluctant to surrender to the advancing day. Colonel Jack Harmon moved through the hallowed grounds with the measured gait of a man who had spent decades in uniform. At 68, his weathered face bore the marks of battles fought on foreign soil, deep creases around eyes that had witnessed both the best and worst of humanity. In his right hand, he carried an M91A1 pistol, not as a threat, but as an offering. The weapon, with its well-worn grip and blued steel frame, had accompanied him through jungles, deserts, and mountains across 3 continents. Jack stopped before a modest white marker inscribed with the name Major Thomas Reynolds, 1952-2022, beloved husband, father, soldier. De oppresso liber, the motto of the Special Forces, to liberate the oppressed. Jack placed the pistol briefly against the stone before returning it to the shoulder holster beneath his leather jacket. From his pocket, he withdrew a challenge coin, a heavy metal disc embossed with the insignia of MACV-SOG, the classified special operations group that had conducted covert missions during Vietnam. He placed it atop the headstone, where it caught the morning light. 3 years, Tom, Jack's voice rasped, unaccustomed to speaking aloud when alone. 3 years, and I didn't know. Should have been here sooner. He unscrewed the cap from a silver flask and poured a measure of whiskey onto the soil at the base of the marker before taking a pull himself. Remember what we promised each other after that ambush outside Pleiku in '73? Said if anything happened to one of us, the other would make sure the family was taken care of. The wind picked up, rustling through the nearby oak trees. 30 years is a long time to keep a promise on ice, brother, but the warrior's code doesn't expire. Jack crouched down, his knees protesting the movement with audible pops. He studied the dates carved into stone, his mind calculating the gap between them. Too short, far too short for a man like Thomas Reynolds. Time to make good, he whispered, standing to his full height of 6'2". He rendered a perfect salute, held it for 3 seconds, then pivoted with military precision and walked away, leaving the challenge coin as both testament and promise. The town of Riverwood stood in the shadow of Fort Mason, one of the Army's premier training facilities for Special Operations Forces. Like many military towns, it had seen better days. The reduction in defense spending had hit hard, leaving Main Street dotted with vacant storefronts bearing "For Lease" signs and dusty windows. The most prominent building was new, the gleaming glass and steel headquarters of Aegis Defense, its modern architecture a stark contrast to the surrounding decay. Jack parked his Ford F-150 pickup in front of Veterans Haven, a diner that had served generations of soldiers since the Vietnam era. The familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease hit him as he entered. Some things remained constant, even as the world changed. The interior walls displayed shadow boxes of military patches, photographs of troops deployed overseas, and framed newspaper clippings highlighting local soldiers' achievements. He selected a corner booth with a clear view of both the entrance and the rear exit, old habits that had kept him alive in hostile territory. The diner was half full, mostly with older men bearing the telltale signs of military service. High and tight haircuts despite being retired for decades, ramrod straight posture even while seated, eyes that constantly scan their surroundings. "Coffee, sir?" A woman in her early 40s approached, coffee pot in hand. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, lines of exhaustion etched around kind eyes. Her name tag read, Christine. Jack felt his chest tighten as he recognized Thomas's widow. "Black, please," he managed, studying her face. The years had been both kind and cruel. She remained beautiful, but carried the weight of loss in the slight downturn of her shoulders. "You passing through?" Christine asked as she filled his cup with coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Something like that. Jack wrapped his hands around the mug, appreciating its warmth. He noted the small gold star pin on her collar, the symbol of a Gold Star family who had lost someone in service. Let me know if you want to order breakfast. She moved away with practiced efficiency, attending to other customers. Jack observed the diner with a tactical eye, noting signs of financial strain. A menu with prices crossed out and rewritten higher, ceiling tiles stained from a leak that hadn't been fixed, empty spaces where decorations had once hung. The front door opened with a jingle of bells, and Jack's attention shifted. A teenage girl in a wheelchair entered, maneuvering with practiced ease between tables. Her long brown hair was pulled back in a style similar to her mother's, and she had the same determined set to her jaw. This had to be Sarah Reynolds, 17 now, if Jack's math was right, Thomas's daughter, not so little anymore. Jack watched as Christine's entire demeanor brightened, her movements becoming more animated as she approached her daughter, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. Sarah wheeled herself to a corner table equipped for her chair's height. She pulled out a laptop plastered with military and patriotic stickers, one prominently displaying the Green Beret insignia, and opened it, immediately absorbed in her work. Frank studied her with interest. The wheelchair was a high-end model, carbon fiber and titanium, designed for active users. The girl herself radiated intensity, her father's daughter without question. The bell above the door jingled again, and the atmosphere in the diner subtly shifted. Three young men entered, led by a tall, athletic-looking blonde in an expensive leather jacket. His confident stride and the deference shown by his companions marked him as the leader. Jack immediately noted the bulge of a concealed weapon beneath the jacket of one follower, a Sig Sauer P320 if he wasn't mistaken, not the choice of an amateur. "That's Matthew Carter," murmured an elderly veteran who had taken the stool next to Jack's booth. "Senator Richard Carter's son. The senator used to be Colonel Carter before he retired and started Aegis Defense." The old-timer sipped his coffee. "Those other two are just hired muscle, ex-military private security." Jack nodded, taking in the information. "And they have history with the girl in the wheelchair?" The old-timer sighed. "Sarah's a good kid, smart as a whip. Runs some kind of investigative blog that's gotten attention outside Riverwood. Word is she wrote something about questionable defense contracts between Aegis and the Pentagon with information from leaked documents." Sarah visibly tensed as the three young men took a booth not far from hers, shrinking into herself as she stared more intently at her computer screen. Christine approached their table, professional smile firmly in place, though Jack could see the effort it cost her. "What can I get you boys today?" Her tone remained pleasant but cool. Matthew Carter lounged back, making a show of checking his expensive watch. "I'm surprised this place is still open," he commented, just loudly enough to be heard across the diner. "Dad says Fort Mason's budget cuts will force half the businesses in town to close by year's end. Shame about all these veterans establishments." Christine's spine stiffened, but her voice remained steady as she took their order and returned to the kitchen. Matthew's attention turned to Sarah, his eyes narrowing. "Hey there, Rolling Thunder," he called out, using what was clearly a mocking nickname. "Writing more garbage about my father's company. How's that working out for you?" Sarah kept her eyes fixed on her screen, her jaw clenching visibly. Matthew's smile turned predatory as he stood and approached her table. Jack tensed, his hand instinctively moving toward his holstered pistol. "I asked you a question, War Bride," Matthew continued, leaning down so his face was uncomfortably close to hers. "Your crippled crusade isn't going to change anything. My father has friends in places your dead daddy never reached." Sarah's face flushed red, anger momentarily overcoming fear. "At least my father earned his rank, instead of buying it through political connections." Matthew's expression darkened. One of his companions raised his phone, clearly recording the exchange. You think you're so smart? Matthew hissed, reaching for Sarah's coffee mug. Let's see how smart you look with breakfast in your lap. Maybe it'll match your useless legs. His hand moved toward her mug, and Sarah braced herself for the inevitable humiliation. Jack moved with the fluid precision of a combatant, with thousands of hours of training. In 2 strides, he crossed the distance, his hand clamping around Matthew's wrist with a grip hardened by decades of weapons handling. That's enough. Son, Jack's voice dropped into the commanding tone that had directed men in battle, quiet but carrying absolute authority. Matthew straightened, turning to face the interruption with annoyance that quickly shifted to caution as he took in Jack's size and bearing. This isn't your business, old man, Matthew said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Jack maintained his grip, applying pressure to specific nerves that made Matthew's fingers involuntarily release the coffee mug. He maneuvered himself between Matthew and Sarah's table with the economy of movement that marked a trained operator. I've trained over 500 soldiers in my career, Jack said, his voice remaining level. You wouldn't have made the cut. The diner had gone silent, every eye fixed on the confrontation. The only sound was the sizzle of bacon on the grill and the soft hum of the ceiling fans. Do you know who my father is? Matthew's voice held the confidence of someone who had used that line effectively many times before. Senator Richard Carter, former Colonel, 5th Special Forces Group, Afghanistan 2002-2004, currently CEO of Aegis Defense and Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Jack's recitation was clinical, devoid of emotion. I knew him before you were born. Matthew's companion moved his hand toward the concealed weapon, but Jack's gaze flicked to him. Son, if you clear leather, you'd better be prepared to use that sidearm. I don't recommend it. Something in Jack's tone made the young man freeze. What's going on here? Christine emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She stopped short when she saw Jack, her eyes widening in recognition. Colonel Harmon? Jack released Matthew's wrist, stepping back but maintaining his position between the young man and Sarah. Mrs. Reynolds, it's been a long time. You know this guy, Mom? Sarah asked, surprise evident in her voice. Christine nodded slowly. Colonel Jack Harmon. He served with your father in Vietnam and other places. Her tone suggested there was much more to the story than she was saying. Matthew rubbed his wrist, glaring at Jack. You just made a serious mistake, Harmon. My father doesn't take kindly to threats against his family. Neither do I, Jack replied, his gaze never wavering. As Matthew and his companions retreated toward the door, the young man called back, This isn't over. It rarely is, Jack murmured, watching them depart. The tension in the diner slowly dissipated as conversations resumed. Jack turned to Sarah, who was studying him with undisguised curiosity. You okay, miss? I'm fine, she said, her voice steadier than her expression suggested. Thanks for the assist, but I can handle Carter and his goons. Jack nodded, recognizing the stubborn pride that reminded him so much of her father. No doubt, but sometimes even the best operators need backup. Christine gestured toward an empty chair at Sarah's table. Join us. I think we have some catching up to do. As Jack settled into the seat, he noted the flicker of interest in Sarah's eyes. Mom never told me you and Dad served together, she said. Were you in the same unit? MACV-SOG initially, Jack confirmed, using the designation for the highly classified Special Operations Group that had conducted covert missions during Vietnam. Later, we worked together in Afghanistan, Cuba, and a few places that still don't officially exist on any deployment roster. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Dad never talked much about his service. He wouldn't have, Jack agreed. Men like your father, like us, we learned to compartmentalize. Keep the battlefield separate from home. He glanced at the laptop. I hear you've been doing some investigating of your own. Sarah tensed again, her eyes darting to her mother. It's okay, Christine sighed. Colonel Harmon isn't exactly a stranger. To Jack, she explained, Sarah runs an investigative blog focused on defense contracts and military spending. She's become something of a thorn in Senator Carter's side. My latest piece was about Project Atlas, Sarah said, lowering her voice. Aegis Defense is developing autonomous weapon systems with artificial intelligence for the Pentagon, but there are rumors they're selling the technology to foreign interests. She hesitated. My source sent documentation, but when I tried to verify it, suddenly my laptop was hacked. And I've been followed for weeks. Jack's expression darkened. Your father was investigating something similar before his accident, wasn't he? The sudden silence confirmed his suspicion. Christine's face paled slightly. How did you know that? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Jack could answer, the diner's door burst open. Two Riverwood police officers entered, their expressions grim as they scanned the room before focusing on Jack. Jack Harmon, the older officer asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Jack nodded once, remaining seated. I'm Chief Wilson. Senator Carter has filed assault charges against you for the incident with his son. You'll need to come with us. Christine stood up. That's ridiculous. Matthew was harassing my daughter. Colonel Harmon merely intervened. Wilson's expression didn't change. Ma'am, we have video evidence showing this man grabbing Matthew Carter and making threats. The senator is pressing charges. Of course he is, Sarah muttered just loudly enough to hear. Jack considered his options. He could resist, might even make it out of town before they organized a real pursuit. But that would mean leaving Sarah and Christine to face the Carters' retaliation alone. All right, he said calmly, standing up. Lead the way. Jack, wait, Christine protested. This isn't right. We should call a lawyer. It's okay, Jack assured her. Not my first rodeo with this kind of justice. I'll be fine. As Wilson moved to escort him out, Jack turned back to Sarah. When I get back, let's talk about your laptop. I might be able to help recover whatever they damaged. As he was led to the police cruiser, Jack caught sight of a black Suburban with tinted windows parked across the street. Behind the glass, he could just make out a figure watching the proceedings. Senator Richard Carter himself, accompanied by a man whose face Jack recognized from intelligence briefings years ago, a former Spetsnaz operative now working as a private military contractor. Jack settled into the back of the police car, mind already plotting his next moves. He'd made a promise 30 years ago, and he intended to keep it, whether the Carters liked it or not. The Riverwood police station smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy, a familiar combination to anyone who had navigated military administration. Jack sat alone in an interview room, hands relaxed on the metal table, posture erect despite the uncomfortable chair. The door opened, and Chief Wilson entered, followed by Senator Richard Carter. Carter cut an imposing figure even in his 60s, 6-foot-tall, athletic build maintained despite years behind a desk, blonde hair now silver but still thick. His tailored Armani suit couldn't quite hide his military bearing, and his shoes, black Oxford dress shoes, were polished to a mirror shine that betrayed decades of military discipline. Harmon, Carter's voice carried the practiced smoothness of a politician, though his eyes remained cold. I thought you died in Syria in 2015. Many people thought that, Jack replied evenly. But as you know, men like us are hard to kill. Aren't we, Colonel? Carter's jaw tightened at the deliberate use of his former rank, rather than his senatorial title. He dismissed Wilson with a curt nod, waiting until the door closed before speaking again. You're interfering in matters beyond your understanding, Jack. This isn't some backwater insurgency where your particular skills apply. Carter leaned forward, resting his manicured hands on the table. Sarah Reynolds is digging into classified defense projects using stolen information. That makes her a national security concern. Funny how national security always seems to align perfectly with your corporate interests. Jack observed. Carter's expression hardened. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave Riverwood today. You won't contact Christine or Sarah Reynolds again. You won't return to my town. If you follow these simple instructions, we'll forget about the assault charges. His voice dropped lower. If you don't, then I'll make sure you're prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. With your record of classified operations, I imagine there's plenty that would interest a good prosecutor. Jack considered the man before him. During their deployments in Afghanistan, Carter had been known for his ambition rather than his leadership, a political officer more concerned with how operations would advance his career than with the welfare of his men. I made a promise to Thomas Reynolds a long time ago, Jack said finally. I intend to keep it. Something flickered across Carter's face at the mention of Thomas's name, a momentary tightening around the eyes that most would miss. But Jack had spent a lifetime reading people who meant him harm. Thomas Reynolds died in a motorcycle accident, Carter said flatly. Tragic, but nothing sinister. His widow seems to be filling their daughter's head with conspiracy theories. Is that why his laptop and research disappeared from the crash site? Jack asked quietly. Standard procedure for motorcycle accidents these days? Carter stood abruptly. You're being released with a warning, Harmon. Don't mistake my courtesy for weakness. I protect what's mine. Always have. He straightened his tie. You have until sunset to leave town. After that, all bets are off. After Carter departed, Chief Wilson returned to process Jack's release. As he collected his personal effects, Jack's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mason Range, 1400 hours. Come alone. Miller. A faint smile crossed Jack's face. Perhaps he wasn't as alone in this fight as Carter believed. The Mason shooting range occupied 50 acres of woodland on the outskirts of Riverwood, far enough from town to muffle the sound of gunfire. As Jack drove his F-150 up the gravel road, he noted the security cameras positioned at strategic intervals, commercial models, but professionally installed for maximum coverage. A weathered sign announced Miller's tactical training in faded red letters. Jack parked next to the only other vehicle in the lot, a lovingly maintained 1972 Jeep CJ with Vietnam-era markings. Before Jack could reach the main building, the crack of a high-powered rifle split the air. He followed the sound to a covered firing line where a solitary figure lay prone behind a scoped rifle, eye pressed to the optic. Still hitting what you aim at, Frank, Jack called out, careful to remain behind the yellow safety line. Master Sergeant Frank Miller, retired, squeezed off one more round before engaging the safety and rising to his feet with the deliberate movements of a man whose body had endured too many hard landings. At 75, Frank's face was a topographic map of wrinkles, his voice roughened by 4 decades of cigarettes and Jack Daniels. But his eyes remained sharp beneath bushy white eyebrows. Harmon, you old war dog. Frank extended a hand, weathered by decades of weapons handling. Figured you'd show up sooner or later when I heard about Thomas. Jack clasped the offered hand. Should have been sooner. Only found out last week. Frank nodded toward a distant target. Jack squinted to see the paper silhouette nearly 1,000 yards away, its center obliterated by multiple shots grouped tightly together. Not bad for an old man, Jack observed. The fundamentals don't change, Frank replied, breaking down his M40A5 sniper rifle with practiced efficiency. Wind, distance, breathing, trigger control. Wish I could say the same for this town. He secured the weapon in a hard case. Let's talk inside. The interior of Frank's office was military spare. Functional furniture, walls decorated with unit photos and shadow boxes of medals, a worn American flag carefully folded into a triangle. A coffee pot gurgled in the corner, filling the air with the aroma of dark roast. Frank poured 2 mugs, adding a splash of whiskey to each. Medicinal, he explained with a wink. sliding one across the desk to Jack. So, Frank settled into his chair. You've managed to piss off Richard Carter within 24 hours of arriving. Some things never change. Jack sipped the doctored coffee. Carter's running Project Atlas through Aegis Defense. Thomas was investigating it before he died. Frank's expression turned grim. Atlas isn't just an autonomous weapon system, Jack. It's a backdoor into military defense networks. The AI can penetrate command and control systems, leaving them vulnerable to external control. He opened a drawer and withdrew a thick folder. Thomas came to me about 6 months before his accident. Said he'd discovered Aegis was selling components of the system to foreign interests through shell companies. Who? Jack asked, though he suspected the answer. Miguel Vargas. Frank slid across a photograph showing Richard Carter shaking hands with a well-dressed Hispanic man at what appeared to be a charity gala. Former cartel enforcer, now operates as an arms dealer under the name Michael Vega, legitimate businessman on paper, but still connected to his old networks. Jack studied the image. Carter's selling American military technology to cartels? Worse, Frank corrected. He's selling to anyone with cash, including groups with ties to foreign intelligence services actively working against U.S. interests. He tapped the folder. Thomas had compiled enough evidence to trigger a Senate investigation and possibly criminal charges. Then suddenly, Frank snapped his fingers. Motorcycle crash on a road he'd driven 1,000 times. No investigation? Jack asked. Chief Wilson closed it in 48 hours. Single vehicle accident. Case closed. Frank's disgust was evident. Thomas's laptop, backpack, and research all disappeared from the scene. Convenient. Jack leaned forward. Sarah's been continuing her father's investigation through her blog. Now she's being targeted. Frank nodded grimly. That girl's got her father's instincts and twice his stubbornness. She reached out to me last month, wanted firearms training, said she was being followed. You trained her? Jack asked, surprised. Modified program for her physical limitations. She's a natural shot. Pride tinged Frank's voice. Reminds me of teaching you boys back in the day. His expression sobered. But she needs more than marksmanship now. Carter's bringing in private contractors, ex-Spetsnaz, former South African Special Forces, professional hitters, not just intimidation. Jack's phone buzzed with a text from Christine. Need to talk. Meet at the house, 248 Oakwood Drive. I need to go, Jack said, rising. Sarah and Christine may have more information. Frank stood as well, his knees cracking audibly. I'll make some calls. Still know a few old war horses who owe me favors. He fixed Jack with a penetrating stare. You're going to need backup, Colonel. Carter plays for keeps. So do I, Jack replied, heading for the door. As Jack reached his truck, Frank called after him. Jack, Thomas always said if anything happened to him, the truth would be in the code. Said you'd understand. Jack nodded, a memory surfacing from decades past, a coded communication system they developed during covert operations in Southeast Asia. Perhaps Thomas had left something behind, after all. Christine Reynolds lived in a modest 2-story home on a quiet street lined with oak trees. As Jack parked his truck, he noticed Sarah sitting on the front porch, apparently waiting for him. Her face lit up with recognition as he approached. Mom's inside making lunch, she said by way of greeting. She said you'd be coming. She studied him with undisguised curiosity. Were you really in MACV-SOG with my dad? The declassified files say they conducted cross-border operations into Laos and Cambodia. Jack raised an eyebrow. You've done your research. Military history minor, Sarah explained. When you can't walk, you read a lot. There was no self-pity in her tone, just matter-of-fact acceptance. Yes, I served with your father in MACV-SOG, Jack confirmed. Later, we both joined Special Forces, Green Berets. Thomas was one of the best operators I ever worked with. Sarah's expression softened. He never talked about his service. Mom said he wanted to keep that part of his life separate. Many combat veterans do, Jack said gently, especially those in special operations. The things we saw, the things we did, they don't always translate to civilian life. He gestured toward her wheelchair. Your accident, was it after your father died? Sarah nodded. 6 months after, drunk driver hit our car. Mom walked away with minor injuries, but my spinal cord was severed at T10. She met his gaze directly. Dad would have said it was tactical disadvantage to be overcome through adaptation and planning. Jack couldn't help but smile. Sounds exactly like Thomas. His expression turned serious. Your blog, the Atlas investigation. How much did you uncover? Sarah glanced around, then lowered her voice. Enough to know it wasn't supposed to exist. Atlas was developed as a defensive system initially, but Aegis modified it into an offensive weapon. The AI can penetrate any networked defense system in the world, in the wrong hands. It could cripple American military response capabilities, Jack finished, or worse, be used to hijack weapon systems. Sarah nodded grimly. My source sent documentation proving Aegis sold components to shell companies linked to foreign intelligence services. I was verifying the data when my laptop was compromised. Your source? Was it inside Aegis? I don't know, Sarah admitted. They used encrypted channels and code names, but they had access to high-level security clearance materials. The front door opened and Christine emerged, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Lunch is ready, she announced, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Why don't you both come inside? The interior of the Reynolds home reflected Christine's practical nature, comfortable but not fancy, with military memorabilia tastefully displayed alongside family photos. Jack's attention was drawn to a shadow box containing Thomas's Green Beret, medals, and Special Forces insignia. Over sandwiches at the kitchen table, Christine finally asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. Why now, Jack? It's been 3 years since Thomas died. Jack met her gaze steadily. I only learned about his death last week. I've been off the grid for a while. After Syria? Christine asked, surprising him with her knowledge. Yes, Jack acknowledged. The official report listed me as killed in action. Easier that way, for everyone involved. Christine nodded, understanding the unspoken realities of covert operations. Thomas suspected something was wrong at Aegis for months before he died. He was gathering evidence, building a case. Her voice caught slightly. The night of the accident, he called to say he was coming home with something important. He sounded excited, like he'd found the missing piece. But he never made it, Jack said quietly. The police said he took a curve too fast, lost control. But Thomas knew that road like the back of his hand. Christine's hands tightened around her coffee mug. After the funeral, I asked if they'd found his laptop or research materials. Everything was gone, except his wallet and keys. Mom thinks Senator Carter had Dad killed, Sarah stated bluntly. So do I. Christine shot her daughter a warning look, but didn't contradict her. Jack considered his next words carefully. If Thomas found evidence of technology transfers to foreign entities, that would constitute treason. Men like Richard Carter don't risk exposure. They eliminate threats. Sarah wheeled herself to a cabinet, retrieving an external hard drive. I saved backups of everything I'd gathered before my laptop was compromised. It's not conclusive, but it points to systematic corruption at the highest levels of Aegis. Jack examined the drive. Mind if I take a look? Using Christine's desktop computer, they reviewed Sarah's files. Property records showing Aegis subsidiaries, purchasing land near sensitive military installations, financial transactions through offshore accounts, shipment manifest with suspicious redactions. Here, Sarah pointed to a spreadsheet. These shell companies all trace back to Michael Vega, formerly Miguel Vargas. And this coding sequence, It's part of Atlas's core architecture, embedded in systems sold to foreign clients. Jack studied the code, recognition dawning. This isn't just any code. It's a variant of an encryption method Thomas and I developed during our time in MacVSOG. He pointed to a specific sequence. See these variables? They're based on our old call signs and operation dates. Sarah's eyes widened. Dad hid a message in the code? Not a message, Jack corrected, his fingers flying across the keyboard. A key. He entered a series of commands and suddenly a hidden partition on the drive opened, revealing dozens of encrypted files. Oh my God, Sarah breathed. It was there all along. The files contained damning evidence, internal Aegis memos describing Atlas's capabilities, contracts with known front companies for hostile regimes, and most crucially, emails between Richard Carter and Miguel Vargas discussing the elimination of security concerns. One email specifically mentioned Thomas Reynolds as a problem requiring permanent resolution. Christine's face went pale. They killed him. They actually killed him. Before Jack could respond, his phone rang. Frank Miller's number. Jack, we've got trouble. Carter's men just hit the diner. Complete destruction. And they're not stopping there. I've picked up chatter about securing all loose ends. Jack's expression hardened. They're coming here next. How much time do we have? 20 minutes, maybe less, Frank replied. I'm mobilizing some old friends, but we need extraction now. Understood. Rally point B. Jack ended the call, turning to Christine and Sarah. We need to move. Carter's men destroyed the diner and are heading here. Grab essential documents and medications. 2-minute drill. To their credit, both women sprang into action without questions. Christine disappeared upstairs while Sarah rapidly transferred files to a portable drive and grabbed a go bag from beneath her desk, clearly prepared for emergency evacuation. Jack moved through the house with tactical efficiency, checking sight lines and potential entry points. From an upstairs window, he spotted a black SUV moving slowly down the street. Time's up, he called. Out the back now. As they hurried toward Jack's truck parked behind the garage, the distant sound of breaking glass confirmed Jack's warning. Christine helped Sarah transfer to the passenger seat while Jack secured her wheelchair in the truck bed. Where are we going? Christine asked as they pulled away, keeping to side streets. Mason Range, Jack replied, constantly checking the mirrors for pursuit. Frank's setting up a safe house. He handed Sarah his phone. Call this number. Tell them Phoenix is rising. They'll understand. Sarah made the call, her voice steady despite the circumstances. When she disconnected, she looked at Jack with newfound respect. Who exactly are you, Colonel Harmon? Just an old soldier keeping a promise, Jack answered, turning onto the road leading to Frank's shooting range. As they crested the hill, Jack was greeted by an unexpected sight. Parked in a defensive formation around Frank's main building were 6 motorcycles and 3 pickup trucks. Standing at attention beside them were 8 men ranging in age from 40 to 70, all bearing the unmistakable bearing of Special Operations veterans. Frank Miller stood at their center, an M4 carbine slung across his chest. As Jack parked, Frank approached with a grim smile. The old gang's all here, he announced. Operation Phoenix is a go. Inside Frank's reinforced office, converted now to an impromptu operations center, Jack studied the assembled veterans with appreciation. Each man present had served with either himself or Thomas during decades of classified operations. Rangers, Green Berets, SEALs, all now united by a common purpose. Captain Michael Torres, former SEAL Team 6 commander, now Riverwood's military police liaison, spread a tactical map across the central table. At 45, Torres remained combat-ready, his muscular frame and alert eyes suggesting he hadn't gone soft in his transition to civilian life. Fort Mason's security is compromised, Torres reported. Carter has assets inside the base monitoring communications. Local police are effectively under his control. We're on our own, then, Jack concluded. Not entirely, Torres corrected, nodding to a silver-haired man in the corner. Chief Warrant Officer Peterson still runs the secure communications hub at Fort Mason. He's kept this off official channels. Peterson stepped forward. Senator Carter is hosting a demonstration of Project Atlas tomorrow morning at Aegis headquarters. Foreign military observers and defense contractors will be present. Foreign as in NATO allies, or foreign as in potential adversaries, Jack asked. Peterson's expression hardened. Both, plus representatives from private military companies with questionable operational histories. Sarah, who had been reviewing the files from her father's hidden partition, looked up sharply. The demonstration is cover for a sale. The guest list includes front men for 3 separate foreign intelligence services. Jack turned to Frank. We need to move tonight. Once Atlas is transferred, we lose any leverage. Frank nodded. My thoughts exactly. We've been reconnoitering the Aegis compound. Security is tight but not impenetrable. Torres has the layout. The captain unrolled detailed blueprints of the Aegis headquarters. Main R&D lab is here, in the sub-basement. Access requires biometric authorization and keycard. Guards are former military, working in 4-hour shifts. Surveillance, Jack asked. Standard CCTV plus thermal imaging at key access points, Torres replied. But there's a vulnerability in their power supply. Primary and backup run through this junction box on the east side. Take it out, and they're on emergency lighting only for 30 seconds before generators kick in. Jack studied the plans, military training automatically calculating approach vectors and fields of fire. We'll need a distraction on the opposite side, something to draw security response away from our insertion point. Already planned, Frank said with a wolfish grin. Old-school diversion package, just like Laos 71. The veterans spent the next hour detailing their assault plan, falling into the familiar rhythm of mission preparation. Christine watched with a mixture of awe and concern as these aging warriors plotted with the precision of men half their age. Sarah, meanwhile, had been working intensely on her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. I've got something, she announced suddenly. The Atlas demonstration is scheduled to include a live network penetration test. They're going to demonstrate how the system can bypass military-grade security protocols. That's their vulnerability, Jack realized. If we can access the system during the demonstration, we could use their own technology against them. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And I've found my father's back door into the Atlas kernel. He built it as a safeguard in case the system ever needed to be shut down remotely. A slow smile spread across Jack's face, the first genuine one since arriving in Riverwood. Sarah, you are definitely your father's daughter. He turned to the assembled veterans. Gentlemen, we have our mission. Operation Phoenix is a go at 500 hours. As the men dispersed to prepare equipment and rest before the operation, Christine pulled Jack aside. This is insane, she whispered. These men are in their 60s and 70s. You're going against a private military force with outdated tactics and aging bodies. Jack met her worried gaze. Age brings wisdom, Christine. And in our line of work, the survivors are the ones who learn to adapt. He glanced toward where Sarah was still working, surrounded by veteran operators twice her age, who were listening intently to her technical instructions. Besides, he added softly, we have something Carter doesn't. What's that? Christine asked. Jack's expression turned solemn. The warrior's code. Leave no man behind, in life or death. Thomas was one of us. We don't abandon our brothers, not even after the grave. As darkness fell over the Mason Range, the veterans made final preparations for battle, cleaning weapons, checking equipment, rehearsing movements. Despite their age, Each man moved with the muscle memory of thousands of hours of training and combat experience. Sarah worked with Torres to integrate her father's backdoor code into a tactical tablet, while Frank distributed communication equipment configured to frequencies unknown to civilian monitors. Jack stepped outside to clear his head, gazing up at stars visible in the clear night sky. The weight of command, a familiar burden he hadn't felt in years, settled across his shoulders. "Thought you could use this," Frank said, appearing silently beside him and offering a flask. Jack accepted it with a nod of thanks, taking a measured sip of whiskey. "Think we're too old for this, Frank?" The older man chuckled. "Probably, but age and treachery beat youth and skill every time." He grew serious. "Thomas would have done the same for any of us." "Yes, he would have," Jack agreed, handing back the flask. "There's something you should know," Frank said after a moment. "I've called in our final reserve. If things go sideways tomorrow—" Jack raised an eyebrow. "The nuclear option?" Frank nodded solemnly. "Let's hope we don't need it." As they turned to head back inside, Jack caught sight of Sarah watching them through the window, her young face set with determination that mirrored her father's. In that moment, Jack knew with certainty that whatever happened tomorrow, he would keep his promise to Thomas, even if it cost him his life. The Warriors' code demanded nothing less. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of fire as Operation Phoenix commenced. Jack led the primary assault team, himself, Torres, and two former Rangers, toward the east side of the Aegis compound. Each man moved with the practiced stealth of veteran operators, utilizing terrain and shadows, despite bodies that protested with every crouch and sprint. Their equipment reflected their experience. Not the latest tactical gear, but well-maintained weapons and communication systems chosen for reliability over flash. Jack carried his trusted M91A1 pistol and a suppressed MP5, an older submachine gun, but one he could field strip blindfolded. Frank Miller and his two-man sniper team had positioned themselves on a ridgeline 800 yards from the compound, providing overwatch through high-powered optics. The remaining veterans formed the extraction team, ready to move on Jack's command. "Falcon 1 in position," Frank's voice came through Jack's earpiece, using their old MACV-SOG call signs. "I have visual on 4 security personnel at the east entrance. Standard patrol pattern, 30-second intervals." "Copy, Falcon 1, Jack responded, signaling his team to hold position at the tree line. "Status on package delivery?" "Phoenix Nest confirms package is ready," came the reply, code indicating Sarah was in position with her cyber infiltration equipment. At precisely 0530 hours, a series of explosions erupted on the western perimeter of the Aegis compound. Frank's old-school diversion. Alarms blared as security personnel rushed toward the disturbance. "East entrance clear. Move now," Frank advised. Jack's team advanced rapidly, reaching the junction box Torres had identified. With practiced efficiency, they bypassed the security measures and disabled the power supply. As predicted, the compound plunged into momentary darkness before red emergency lighting activated. 30 seconds until generators, Torres warned, working on the electronic lock of a side entrance. The door yielded, and Jack led the way inside, weapon at the ready. The team moved through corridors illuminated only by emergency lighting, encountering minimal resistance, as most security forces had responded to the Western distraction. They reached the server room adjacent to the main demonstration hall just as normal power resumed. Jack positioned his team at strategic points while Torres connected Sarah's tablet to the Aegis network. "Phoenix Nest, we're plugged in," Jack reported. "Execute Phase 2. Miles away at the Mason Range, Sarah's fingers danced across her keyboard, utilizing her father's back door to penetrate the Atlas system. On her screen, lines of code flowed as the infiltration progressed. "I'm in," she confirmed, "downloading all Atlas data and activating the recording protocol. You'll have full access to the demonstration room's audio and video systems in 3, 2, 1. Inside the Aegis building, the final preparations for the Atlas demonstration were underway. The main hall had been configured like a small amphitheater, with tiered seating facing a central presentation area dominated by large display screens. Senator Richard Carter, resplendent in another expensive suit, moved among the assembled guests, a mixture of military officers, government officials, and foreign investors, whose credentials would not withstand serious scrutiny. From their position, Jack could observe the proceedings through the server room's security feed, now controlled by Sarah's infiltration. "Target confirmed," Jack murmured, spotting Carter shaking hands with a man he recognized as Miguel Vargas, Michael Vega. "Multiple secondary targets present. Phoenix Nest. Are you recording?" "Every word," Sarah confirmed. "Ready for Phase 3 on your mark." Jack checked his watch. 2-minute warning. Extraction team, stand by. In the demonstration hall, Senator Carter approached the podium, tapping the microphone to gain attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome to Aegis Defense. Today we are privileged to demonstrate a revolution in defense technology, Project Atlas." As Carter launched into his presentation, the screens behind him displayed technical specifications and simulation videos of Atlas in action. "What makes Atlas truly revolutionary," Carter continued, "is its ability to penetrate even the most sophisticated security systems, providing unprecedented battlefield advantage to its operators. Today we'll demonstrate a live penetration of a simulated military defense network." A technician began typing commands into a terminal, and the main screen displayed a graphical representation of Atlas attacking a network firewall. "Now," Jack ordered. In an instant, the demonstration screens flickered, then changed to display Aegis internal emails, specifically communications between Carter and Vargas, discussing technology transfers to foreign entities. The senator froze mid-sentence, his face draining of color. "What the hell?" he demanded, turning to his technical team. "Shut it down." But Sarah's infiltration had locked them out of their own systems. The screens continued cycling through damning evidence. Financial transactions, classified Pentagon documents showing Atlas's true capabilities, and finally the email discussing the elimination of Thomas Reynolds. Chaos erupted in the demonstration hall. Foreign guests began hurriedly exiting, while Aegis security personnel scrambled to respond to this unexpected development. "Now comes the hard part," Jack told his team, drawing his weapon. "Move to Phase 4. They emerged from the server room, advancing toward the demonstration hall with tactical precision. As they entered, Jack's voice cut through the confusion. "Richard Carter, by authority of the United States Code of Military Justice, you are hereby detained on suspicion of treason, conspiracy to commit murder, and violation of the Arms Export Control Act." Carter's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd. Security, arrest these men." The Aegis security team hesitated, caught between conflicting commands and the damning evidence still playing on the screens. "I wouldn't," Torres advised, his weapon steady. "Captain Michael Torres, military police liaison, Fort Mason. These men are operating under direct authorization of the Judge Advocate General's office." It was a bluff, but a convincing one given Torres's official position and the uncertainty of the moment. Carter backed toward a side exit, signaling frantically to Vargas. "This is a criminal trespass. These men have no authority." "We have all the authority we need," Jack replied, advancing steadily. "The question is, do you want this handled through military justice, or would you prefer we turn everything over to the media first?" Carter's hand moved suddenly toward his jacket, and Jack tensed. But instead of a weapon, the senator produced a small remote control. "You should have stayed dead, Harmon," he snarled, pressing a button. Immediately, metal shutters began descending over all exits, and a computerized voice announced, Security protocol Alpha engaged. Facility lockdown in effect. He's trapping us inside, Torres warned. Not just trapping us, Jack realized with growing alarm. Sarah, what's happening to the Atlas system? At the Mason Range, Sarah's screen filled with warning messages. He's activated some kind of self-destruct. The system is overheating all connected servers, including the ones containing evidence. Can you stop it? Jack demanded, advancing on Carter even as Aegis security personnel began to close in, finally responding to their employer's commands. Working on it, Sarah replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Dad's back door might let me override, but I need time. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Jack and his team found themselves surrounded by Aegis security, while Carter and Vargas moved toward a concealed elevator at the rear of the hall. Falcon 1, Jack called into his comm. Execute Hail Mary. Copy that, Frank replied from his sniper position. Cavalry incoming in 30 seconds. As if on cue, the building's fire suppression system activated, spraying the room with water and creating momentary confusion. Jack used the distraction to break through the security cordon, pursuing Carter and Vargas toward the elevator. He reached them just as the doors began to close, forcing his way inside with sheer physical determination. The doors sealed, leaving Jack alone with the two conspirators in the descending elevator. It's over, Richard, Jack said, his weapon trained on the senator. Atlas is compromised. Your foreign deal's exposed. Even if you destroy the evidence here, too many people already know. Carter's composure finally cracked. You don't understand what's at stake. Atlas represents American dominance for the next 50 years. Yes, I sold components, but only to maintain our strategic position. And Thomas Reynolds, Jack demanded, was murdering him also for American interests? Reynolds was naive, Carter spat. He couldn't see the bigger picture. The elevator reached the subterranean garage. As the doors opened, Jack was momentarily blinded by tactical flashlights, but instead of Aegis reinforcements, he found himself facing a full FBI tactical team. Senator Richard Carter, Miguel Vargas, announced a female agent at the front of the formation. You are under arrest for conspiracy, violation of the Arms Export Control Act, and the murder of Major Thomas Reynolds. Carter's face went slack with shock. This is impossible. Who authorized this? I did, said a voice from behind the FBI team. An older man in a naval uniform stepped forward, Admiral James Harrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Operation Phoenix was authorized at the highest level, Senator. We've been building a case against you for months. Jack lowered his weapon, understanding dawning. This was the nuclear option Frank mentioned. Admiral Harrison nodded. Master Sergeant Miller contacted me 3 days ago. Said an old Phoenix operator had resurfaced with critical intelligence on Atlas. We've had concerns about the project for some time, but couldn't prove the foreign connections. As the FBI took Carter and Vargas into custody, Harrison turned to Jack. Colonel Harmon, the nation owes you and your team a debt of gratitude. He paused. Again. Jack shook his head. I was just keeping a promise to a brother in arms, Admiral. The best kind of promise there is, Harrison agreed. Thomas Reynolds would be proud. Above them, the sounds of the FBI securing the Aegis facility echoed down the elevator shaft. Operation Phoenix had succeeded, not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through the unbreakable bonds forged in combat decades earlier. The Warriors Code had prevailed. 6 months later, Jack Harmon stood on the parade ground at Fort Mason, watching as a class of Special Forces candidates completed their final qualifying exercises. Beside him, Frank Miller observed the young soldiers with a critical eye, occasionally muttering assessments that made Jack smile. They're getting younger every year, Frank complained, though pride underlay his gruff tone. Or we're getting older, Jack suggested. Speak for yourself, Frank retorted. I can still outshoot half these kids. The Aegis scandal had sent shockwaves through the defense establishment. Richard Carter and Miguel Vargas were awaiting trial on multiple federal charges. While Project Atlas had been placed under direct Pentagon oversight, its offensive capabilities permanently disabled. The Veterans Haven Diner had been rebuilt with funds from a military community grant. Now thriving as both a restaurant and an informal support center for veterans. Christine Reynolds managed the establishment with renewed purpose, her natural caregiving abilities extending beyond food service to helping former service members navigate civilian life. Jack had accepted a position as a training consultant at Fort Mason, passing on decades of operational experience to the next generation of special operators. The irony wasn't lost on him. After years living off the grid, he had found purpose in the very community he'd once fled. A familiar sound drew his attention, the mechanical whir of an approaching wheelchair. Sarah Reynolds navigated across the parade ground, now wearing the distinctive uniform of a West Point cadet during her weekend leave. "Cadet Reynolds," Jack greeted her with a formal salute, which she returned with perfect form despite her seated position. "Colonel Harmon," she replied, then broke into a grin. "Frank said I'd find you terrorizing the new recruits." "Offering constructive criticism," Jack corrected, his own smile belying the stern tone. After the Aegis operation, Sarah had received a special appointment to West Point, where she was now studying cybersecurity with a focus on defense systems. Despite initial concerns about accommodating her physical condition, she had quickly proven herself one of the Academy's most promising cadets. "Admiral Harrison is giving a lecture this afternoon on ethical considerations in modern warfare," Sarah informed them. "He specifically requested both of you attend." "Suggesting or ordering?" Frank asked suspiciously. "Let's call it a strongly worded invitation," Sarah replied diplomatically. As they made their way toward the lecture hall, Jack noticed Sarah's demeanor shift slightly. "Something on your mind, cadet?" She hesitated, then reached into her uniform pocket. "I found this among Dad's things. Mom thought you should have it." She handed him a weathered challenge coin, identical to the one Jack had left on Thomas's grave months earlier. Jack turned the coin over in his hand, noting the massive SOG insignia and the words etched along the edge. "Silent professionals. The Warrior's Code." "Your father carried this through 3 decades and countless operations," Jack said softly. "These weren't just words to him." "Nor to you," Sarah observed. "You kept your promise, even after 30 years. Jack pocketed the coin, its weight familiar and comforting against his chest. "Some promises don't expire, Sarah. The Warrior's Code isn't about fighting. It's about honor, loyalty, and sacrifice, values that transcend the battlefield." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I'm beginning to understand that. At the Academy, they teach us about modern warfare, drones, cyber operations, AI systems, but they also emphasize that technology is just a tool. It's the human element, the moral compass, that determines how that tool is used." "Your father understood that better than most," Frank contributed. "He could have ignored what he discovered at Aegis, looked the other way for a comfortable retirement. Instead, he chose to stand for what was right, knowing the risks." As they approached the lecture hall, Jack noticed a group of aging veterans gathered near the entrance. Men who had served in Vietnam, Desert Storm, and subsequent conflicts. Each nodded respectfully as Sarah passed, acknowledging not just her cadet status, but her connection to Thomas Reynolds. "Your father's legacy lives on," Jack told her quietly. "Not just in you, but in every soldier who chooses honor over expediency, courage over comfort." Sarah's eyes shone with pride and determination. "Then I have big boots to fill." "You're already filling them," Jack assured her. Above them, the American flag snapped in the breeze against a clear blue sky. Jack Harmon, who had spent decades in the shadows, found himself at peace in the light. The promise he had made 30 years ago had been kept, But something unexpected had emerged in the process. A new purpose, a new family of sorts, and the knowledge that the Warriors Code would continue through generations yet to come. Thomas Reynolds would have approved.